Well, it's a great privilege to be invited to preach your Easter Sunday sermon from the Gospel of Mark and to respond to your preaching theme, Journey to the Cross, Laying Down Despair. So this sermon comes at the end of a long Lenten series focusing on the journey to the cross. And I suppose now we're thinking about the journey beyond the cross. In Holy Week, we're confronted by the cross of Christ on Good Friday. And the shock and awe that stirs in us is an invitation for us all to lay our burdens down at the foot of the cross and just rest in wonder, bathed in God's grace. And for me, yesterday, Holy Saturday, follows on as an amazing day of rest, a true Sabbath, a resting in God's grace. But now Easter Sunday's come, and I feel ready to move beyond rest, full of energy again, ready to take action and to be gripped by the power of the resurrection. But as that mysterious reading from the Gospel of Mark reminds us, Easter doesn't begin that way. It begins in the dark, in grief, in confusion. Christ is risen, but nobody expects it. And it's good for us to wrestle with those darker and less certain emotions on Easter Sunday, especially as we think about a preaching theme of moving beyond despair. We must first acknowledge it before we can transcend it. And Mark very clearly wants to tell the resurrection story in such a way that we remember that Easter morning didn't feel like resurrection at first. It began in sadness, in silence. Very early, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. These three women, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome, came carrying a burden, what is translated to us as spices. So these were the traditional materials derived from tree bark and resin that were used to mask the smell of decay around a dead body. And the purpose of them was to honor the deceased and also make the space around them more bearable for mourners to visit. So these three women went out early on the first Easter morning, expecting to find death, not life. Jesus, of course, had been buried in haste on Good Friday because it was almost time for everyone to stop working as the Sabbath day began in the evening. And so at this point, early dawn on Easter Sunday, the women were simply coming to complete the process of tending Jesus' dead body as soon as legally possible, once the Sabbath day of rest had been concluded, and that was only dawn on the Sunday. They'd risen early to ensure that things had been done fully, and they came to fulfill a sad duty, not to witness a miracle. The women were faithful to the task, but they were heartbroken as they approached it. And for them, Good Friday still had the last word. For them, as they walked, the cross, they remembered, had no glory associated with it, only sadness and loss. And for them, despair must have been something they carried as tangibly as the jars of spices they held in their hands. And perhaps that kind of despair is a place where many of us begin our Easter Sunday today, if we're truly honest. In our life today, Easter Sunday doesn't always dawn on people who feel triumphant, who feel ready to shout, Alleluia. Sometimes it dawns on people who are just whispering to themselves, I'm just trying to get through this day. So how does despair grip us, take hold of us, as it must have gripped Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome on that first Easter day? Well, despair often makes us walk towards things that seemingly can't give life. and the women are walking towards a tomb. And that's where our despair often leads, towards things that seem to be finished, closed off, incapable of changing for the better. And the women ask, who will roll the stone for us away? And this is the way despair often manifests in our lives. We're confused. We don't know what action to take. And in this story, the women are moving faithfully towards the tomb, but they don't actually have a plan for how they're going to access it and do the duty they've come to do. And that's how the experience of despair is. Problems seem too big. Stones seem too heavy. The ending already seems to have been written. And yet these women do keep walking, and so must we. They walk even when they can't see a solution. They walk towards the problem, ready to do something, even they don't know exactly how they'll do it. They don't have all the bases covered. And this is vital for us. Faith doesn't always feel triumphant, and sometimes faith is just simply refusing to give up, even when we can't see how God will guide us forwards. And of course, as we know, when the three women do get there, they discover that God has actually been at work already before they arrived. When they reach the tomb, the stone's already been rolled away. Before they prayed, before they hoped, before they understood, God had acted. And this is the grace of the Christian life. This is the resurrection life we are called to. This is the character of the God who meets our despair with work already in progress. As they approached this tomb, fully expecting to encounter death, heaven had already moved the stone, and Jesus himself had already moved on. So let's be honest. If we come here today carrying heavy burdens, the weight of grief, the heaviness of disappointment, the burden of injustice, the fatigue of fighting battles that seem unwinnable. But the message of Easter that we rejoice in today is not try harder, do more work. The Easter message is look again and see what God is already doing. The resurrection experience transforms despair into a new way forwards. And inside the tomb, the women meet a young man in a white robe who speaks a word that changes everything. Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. He is risen. So the angel doesn't simply announce a miracle, but invites the women into a new story, one they'd never anticipated. And so their journey takes a new turn, a new step. They turn from mourning to mission, from despair to declaration, from carrying spices to carrying good news, and from tending to a dead body to encountering a living Christ. And for all of us, Easter can give us a new direction, not erasing the past, but reframing it. The cross is still there, but it's now the sign of God's victory, not defeat. The journey of the cross ends at the empty tomb, where despair is laid down and hope is picked up. On Monday, Thursday, I encouraged everyone to look at the great east window in this church and see all the detail in it. But it's all around the cross. But it's the cross seen in the light of the resurrection, a sign of hope. And we're going to celebrate the communion at the high altar. So when you come forward for your communion with God, you can be close and observe the window for yourselves. So let's just think of our own lives now as we look forward to our communion with God and that touch of grace we receive in the sacrament. Laying down despair, what might that look like for us? How can we be healthy and honest about the real challenges we face in our lives? I don't think that's a sign of despair. I think that's just how all dogs vocalize. So first of all, we need to be prepared to name our despair to ourselves. Jesus doesn't ask us to pretend. The women didn't. They showed up with their grief in full honesty. Resurrection doesn't require denial of what we feel, but engagement with a bigger and deeper reality that God is revealing to us. Once we're honest, once we take another look with fresh eyes, perhaps we'll see what God has already rolled away. Some stones maybe still are in place, but maybe others have moved while we weren't looking. And maybe some of them aren't quite so big and unmovable when we look at them from a different point of view. Easter invites us to look again, and crucially, to think outside the box that we may have been trapped in by our own guilt, our fear, and our shame. Then secondly, having seen that things aren't quite as stuck as we thought they were in our time of despair, we can then begin walking in a new direction. Resurrection is not an idea, but a summons, calling us back into community, sending us out to proclaim life to others, and sending us to meet Jesus in Galilee. And Galilee was the place where the disciples came from, the place where they'd worked as fishermen. So the ordinary places where we live and work, our own homes, are places where we can meet Jesus and get the resurrection perspective. So as we do this, we're letting hope rise again in our lives. And hope doesn't always come as a great shout of hallelujah. Sometimes it comes gently, like the dawn as the sky fades into light. But hope is now the Christian posture. We don't stand like this, with fists clenched, raging against our misfortune. We stand like this, with our hands raised in prayer and praise and adoration. Because the tomb is empty, despair is no longer our destination, just a place where we stop for a while as part of a bigger journey. So let's conclude our reflections this morning. Easter begins in darkness but ends in wonder. Mark tells the story this way so we'll know something crucial. God does his greatest work when we think all is lost. The cross was not the end, our story is not finished, and despair is not the final word. So once again, on this Easter Sunday, hear again the angel's proclamation. He is not here, he is risen. And with those words, and as we come forward in the Eucharist, let's lay down our despair. And remember, we don't just lay it at the foot of the cross, but we finally place it where the women laid their spices, in an empty tomb, and move on to God's next business in our lives. Because the one who was crucified now lives, and his resurrection is God's promise to us that hope will rise again. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.